Ezra, how's it going?
Good, good. How are you?
Oh, not too bad. Greg, Aaron, how's it going?
Hmm. Hey, Aaron.
Sorry, I was just
Somebody's
pulling up my documents, and now I'm trying
somebody's in town hall. That's good.
to. I am.
That'll make it
So
official.
it is official. Yeah, I was just pulling up all the documents that we may need. So
Thanks.
I need to share my screen.
Hey guys.
Hi, Greg. How are you?
All right, how are you guys?
Good. I'm sort of weirded out by the way the sun looks in all the cloudy sky.
I know, isn't it wild? I feel like
Yeah.
me and my neighbor were talking. I don't know. Maybe I felt like you could kind of smell it too. Maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah, they say it's getting bad, but my wife and I have a family vacation planned to Nova Scotia in a few weeks, so we have to figure out whether I think it's going to be okay, but just trying to track that.
Yeah, I haven't been paying too close attention to it, but my husband has. So I hope everything clears up between now and then.
Yeah. I mean,
We're
there's
just
always some disaster somewhere, it seems.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I didn't hear back from anyone that they would not be attending. So, unless, I don't have any emails or anything. So.
Yeah, I'd advocate we give people a couple more seconds.
Ezra, are you driving up at least? Hopefully.
Yeah, we're gonna drive
okay.
up and go through Bar Harbor and all that.
Oh, nice. So that'll,
Yeah.
at least you don't have to worry about the flights then, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
One less.
Yeah. I sort of think I'd be happy if I never got on a plane again.
Or at least the airport.
Yeah, it's just, it never is a good way to start or end a vacation.
Muted. I said it's never easy. There's always something wrong.
Yeah. Although I came back, a couple months ago from the Bahamas. If has anyone used I've had global entry for a while, but hadn't used the new like eye scanning technology that
Oh gosh.
and it's the weirdest. I mean, it's seamless, but you don't take out anything. You
Wow.
don't take out your passport, to the point where we had our kids with us, so I went to gate check a stroller, and there was a guy behind me who came up to the gate and just said, oh, sorry, that's me.
So I think the only person we're waiting for is Matt. It's 7:01 now.
Yeah, Aaron, have you heard back from either of the two Matts as it relates to?
Matt and Matt. And Matt Lowry said he may be a little late or have to step off early. But I did not hear from Matt Bowen. How do you say Bowen? I have not heard from him. So I can shoot them an email if we want to get the meeting started. It's 7:02. I just want to be mindful of everyone's time, because I know some of us are on night meetings almost every night, it feels like.
Yeah, let's convene the meeting, and then if they hop on in midway through, we can pick them up there. So first off, thank you everyone for coming to the June 6th meeting of the MBTA Wakefield 3A multifamily district working group, meeting number 4. So thank you all for taking the time and for dedicating the effort to keep moving this project forward. Before we commence with the balance of this meeting, I'd like to just ask, has everyone had the ability to review the meeting minutes that Aaron issued related to our May 16th meeting?
And I apologize. I know I got them to you guys kind of late. My last week was kind of swamped, so I couldn't format them the way they should have been.
So it sounds like, does anyone have any comments as it relates to the content as laid out in those meeting minutes? Seeing no comments, does anyone can I entertain a motion to accept the meeting minutes from anyone?
So moved.
And do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay, in that case, roll call votes. Greg McIntosh,
Yes.
Julie Smith Galvin,
Yes.
Robin Greenberg,
Yes.
Aaron Kokinda,
Yes.
and myself is a yes, so passes 5-0. And we can move on to the next topic. So the next item on the agenda is related to the balance of the direction that we need to provide Aaron for the MBTA working group in order to assist with the finalization of the modeling that needs to be done for the state. So taking a step back, Aaron, can I just have you run through the list of topics that we discussed that you need with the assistance of Ezra in order to finalize the model so we can get the submission to the state ready, and then we can kind of, a quick high level overview, and then we can kind of start going through with the balance of the group in order to establish, some direction for the balance of this modeling effort.
Sure. So I think before we jump into all that, Ezra and I were able to put a new map together based on our discussion. Well, Ezra, I'll give Ezra the credit, a new map together highlighting the eastern side of Main Street, two new districts from Crescent and Pleasant. So Jim, I don't know if you feel like we should discuss that because that kind of plays into some of these other things that we're discussing, such as max height, parking, all that.
Yeah, I'd like to just review the things that you guys need for information for direction from us. And then I think after that, we can fall back into the map and then actual formalized direction.
Oh, I
just wanna give an
misunderstood.
overview. Yeah, I want to give an
misunderstood.
overview of the things that you guys need.
So I think for us, we need to definitely get the confirmation from this group, which I feel like we did last time, that in regard to the compliance for the MBTA communities, we are just staying to the Wakefield station area. Does not take away from where we look at other areas separate from that. I think we all need to decide we are all in compliance with the 3 districts that we shared at the last meeting on May 16th. But I know we talked about kind of some equity with, the eastern side of Main Street and possibly including some of those areas as well, because they have kind of dense parcels too. We have the rail trail and all that around there as well. So I think we need to decide as a group if we want those areas included as well. And then from there, we kind of can run through all the other kind of dimensional regulations that need to be set forth to the state for us to get into compliance. And so Ezra, I can pass it to you too, if you kind of quickly want to run through what we pulled up with the compliance as well, or if you wanted to add anything.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think there are 3 main parts of coming up with some kind of compliant approach here, and they of course interact. One is the district itself, where on the map does this fall? The second is what's allowed, and I think in terms of that, we pretty much discussed the idea of, there's 2 approaches. One is large multifamily, and the other is more sort of smaller, 3 or 4 family that fills in a neighborhood. Those are the kind of use category. And then the third is the dimensional and other regulations, which is, I think, what Jim and Aaron were talking about. And that's largely what's sort of shown there. The sort of third bunch of stuff is these dimensional and, what we require for parking, for setbacks and all of that. I think we've pretty much solved the middle question. We didn't want to approach this with choosing a few key spots and putting really large high density stuff, but more kind of paint a walkable neighborhood fabric along some of the areas, being careful to stay away from the commercial districts. So we had originally had those 3 different sub-districts. I understand in the last meeting, we talked about this 2 other ones. So I did quickly throw together the numbers there. They basically all come just right about what you need in terms of meeting the density, as long as you're willing to go 3 stories and up to 4 units on a property. It's close, but that sort of gets you the density it seems like you need, as long as you're a little judicious about what you include and what you don't.
Yeah,
Yeah,
do you mind
go
if I
ahead.
just pause you, Ezra? Maybe I wasn't clear enough. So I don't know if people can see my screen, but my understanding is, map aside, and density aside, there are a number of other policy decisions that need to be made by the working group and guidance provided to I'll call it the modeling team between Ezra and Aaron and the GIS staffing we have in terms of height, parking, and some other dimensional descriptions. Can we just run through what those things are in terms of
Sure.
direction that needs to be defined by this working group, such that we can then, we can talk about the map and the density and some of that more holistic stuff. But can we just walk through what are the other key decisions that need to be made as part of this process?
Sure. So in terms of that, we did have to make some assumptions already to put these districts into the model, and we basically treated them all the same, and made certain assumptions for this along these bullet points there. And so I can basically tell you what we went with, and I think the key would be to say, okay, are we still all okay with that, or is there some sort of deal breaker in this? Of course, for these, I think Aaron and I are happy to play with the model and see, is there a way to make even better, bigger setbacks or smaller lot coverages, that sort of stuff. But we need to make sure we're okay with at least the minimums or the maximums we're putting in. So in terms of that, looking down that list, the first one was max height, and we put in 3 stories as that. I think we'd originally talked. Some people thought about 4. A number of the people in that initial meeting said that seemed like that was kind of a whole different character. We did talk about, could we make it work with a 2.5, and what would that look like? I suspect from the point of view of the model, 2.5 and 3 are about the same, as long as the half allows, some sort of living space up in that upper story. It makes it a little trickier for your zoning, but I believe, Aaron, you have somewhere in the zoning already a 2.5 story district. Is that right?
I believe we do. Greg, you may, be able to talk to that.
Single, and I think special, actually, I know single is, and I think special single is too.
Yeah, I have the zoning map because I wanted it for this purpose, single and special single.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think in the map it says.
Yeah, I mean, you can almost forget about special single. It's
right. But so
it's at all.
But it seemed, like if you're allowing 3 stories in the general residence, it didn't seem unusual to allow 3 stories for this one, which is, allowing 3 and 4 family.
And is that essentially 35 feet? Is it like, because the bylaws have sort of a different, they have max number of stories and max height. I mean, there is a loose equivalency between the two, I guess.
Yeah, the modeling really just looks at, it's a very crude approach, and they really just take whatever you say for stories. I think if you were to say, if you were to try to play some kind of complicated monkey business and say, well, you can build these stories, but it also has to be below 12 feet tall, it might say, well, that's not really 3 stories. But it doesn't seem like the model is really caring that much.
Okay, so we could almost just follow the rest of the table.
Keep what you have, exactly.
Okay.
Yep.
So, okay, and is there anybody who, in theory, we could go up to 4 stories, we could relitigate that discussion, but it sounds like we're pretty comfortable with what we had as 3. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and we can also pull whatever you have in your existing zoning, for if there are things in there for, rules about what counts as height, what doesn't, what protrusions are allowed, all that. Basically the idea is to keep as much as possible in your zoning, and just have this be an overlay that has a different column in that dimensional table. Okay, so it'd be 3 stories, which is what we had for all these districts. For parking, we had put in, let me just make sure I confirm this. We had put in, I think, 1.5 per unit as just a blanket across.
That's correct. Yeah. Ezra, do you think it'd be helpful if I put up the model for you, or no?
Sure, if you like, or I can do it as well, but I don't want to have too many different competing screens. Yeah, do you want to pull it up?
Yeah, sure. I was just playing around with 2.5 real quick. So yeah, here we go. If you want to run through, So the way the model works, it's a big Excel spreadsheet, and this is the master zoning parameter sheet. It's a little small because there's so many different parts to it, but basically there's a number of that you can see right there, multifamily 1A in the center of the screen is one of those sub-districts. You're going to see that's these same numbers repeated over to the right, for the 2nd, the 3rd, the 4th, and then the 5th of these potential sub-districts.
And what you can see at the very top, the Y, Y, and N, that's, can you do a 3-family? Can you do a 4-family? Can you do more than that? And so we said, yes, up to 4-family, but no more. And set in the maximum number of units was 4. Down below, then we said, we put in a pretty low minimum lot size of just 4,000. The way the model works is it just looks at your existing parcels. It's not allowing you to subdivide anything or merge anything. So if you put in anything too high, what happens is you wind up losing a bunch of lots. And you can see that reported out later. But we found if we put 4,000, it worked okay. Every one of these districts had a handful of lots that were still unbuildable under this overlay, and that's okay. That those ones can't be developed. It's just if we go from say 4 to 6, more and more of these existing lots you get no production out of them. And since we're right on the edge, 4,000 was kind of what worked. It is a small lot though. I mean, be aware, these will all be existing lots, but there may be some 4,000 square foot lots that could now have a 3-family, 4-family house on them.
And just for reference, our general residence requirement currently is 8,000 with our single at 12.
Yeah.
Right.
And I think the rationale for starting with the 4,000 as a basis was that our overlay district associated with the mixed use is 4,000 as a minimum.
Exactly.
So that was the basis of that as a starting point in order to validate some of these assumptions. So I think that I want to put a pin on that for a second. I think that the minimum lot size is a major point of emphasis or something that we should fall back on and discuss as a group. But I'd like to go through and again identify all of the inputs that we need to make a decision on. So I think that's probably one that warrants further conversation.
Sure. So I think they're not quite in the same order that they are in the model, but we talked about height, which is that next one down, number 3. And then if you keep going down, Aaron, you'll see that, there's ways you can tweak. You can say different heights for different types of buildings and all that. We haven't played with that yet. Then you get maximum building coverage. And we put 35%, which is pretty low. I mean, there's not a whole lot. I mean, this is a lot of the property is set aside for yards and stuff. Because this is still fundamentally a residential district. We weren't talking about large apartment buildings built to the lot line, but rather, things that look like 3-family houses, 4-family houses. So we said, don't cover more than 35% of the lot with the building. So basically you can imagine even on a 4,000 square foot lot, it's taking a third of that, building up 3 stories. There's your 3 or 4 units. And the rest is all setbacks and open space and parking. We specified the minimum open space at 30%. And that would, I believe that mirrors also what you have elsewhere in the zoning.
Yeah, both of those numbers do, the 35 and the 30 for general residence.
Great. And that's big enough that you really do get, something of a yard. I mean, these are, if it's a tiny lot, you're not going to get a huge amount. But again, remember now, if it's a bigger property, if they are, some of them are 6, 7, 8,000 square feet, you're going to get pretty big yards still preserved. So 30 was what we put in for that. We certainly can try a bigger number. I don't think it's going to affect it a whole lot. We put in the setbacks 30 all around, which is what I believe, Aaron, we had elsewhere in the zoning. We pretty much just tried to mirror what you had.
I think it's actually a lot smaller. I think it's
15, 10,
15.
20.
Yeah.
Okay, so maybe we put him in more generous, knowing, look, these are.
Yeah, I think that was what we did, Ezra.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is more conservative, essentially.
Yeah. More buffered everything. And that, I mean, I think that is the main key here. I think part of our thinking is, remember, the one scary thing with all of this is we're talking about by right development. Everything else, if you do a 2-family, 3-family in many places, there's a review by the zoning board, and all kinds, the neighbors weigh in. With by right development, if it fits in the envelope and meets all the requirements you mentioned, they go get a building permit and they can build. So, I don't think that means people are racing to build the ugliest thing they can, but you do need to specify some of this.
And that's just on the use, right? There still can be a site plan review like we talked about last.
Exactly. Yeah. Yep. And I think that's one of the bullet points we included there. we can require site plan review and figure out when we want to require that. So those are the setbacks. We certainly can make them less cushiony. We could explore making them more. At some point, you are going to run into trouble because if especially with those 30-foot ones, if a lot of the lots are narrow, they may look and say, hold on, 30 from the left, 30 from the right. You can only build a spaghetti factory kind of thing. There's not. And I believe that's why that's sort of flagged in dark brown there, is they want to at least look and see, but there's no reason on the face of it that that it's not allowed.
As long as the numbers comply, we may change them anyways, but this, say for setbacks, we just said, our setbacks and I think most of the districts we're looking at are general residence. It could be wrong with that, but I think they pretty much all are, except for maybe an overlap down on this side of the train station, but on the Gould Street side. But will the state take a look and say, hey, yeah, you meet the requirements, but you're trying to require in these districts more more conservative, or is it just no, you meet the requirements, so we're not gonna.
It should just be you meet the requirement. The one place I've seen them take the opposite position is if you make a more stringent affordability requirement.
Okay.
Because then they worry you're using that to kill the development.
Yeah.
But here, as long as it passes some laugh test for buildability, you're on perfectly solid ground to say, look, something that comes in by right needs to have the bigger setbacks. Something that comes in through the existing zoning with a special permit, maybe we don't need that, right?
And Ezra, one other question I had related to kind of the setback and setback adjacencies. Does anything in this require feedback from us as it relates to maximum minimum frontage requirements?
I don't think we put anything in. We certainly can. I don't believe they actually have anywhere in the model where it's spec'd out, but I think we would probably go with whatever you had in your zoning.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't remember that being called out.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's again one where they would look at it, and if they worried you put in some ridiculous number, they would ding you and say this doesn't. There's an aspect of this that I'm a little worried it might be more subjective and discretionary than DHCD is willing to admit. We could probably get the model to work, and then they're going to say like, well, we're still concerned about X or Y or Z. And that's probably within their rights. I mean, because I imagine a lot of communities are going to do stuff to try to torture the model, make it work, but have it be unbuildable. So, but I think if you had the same frontage that you have, I'm sure that would hold up. And do you happen to have that? What that is, Aaron?
It's 80.
It's 80.
Yeah.
So and then just from a modeling perspective, the things that you guys need direction from us on, obviously frontage is something we're going to talk about as we get into the actual development of the bylaw, but from a modeling perspective, to make sure that we kind of check the box in terms of compliance.
Yeah, I'd say the height, the setbacks, and the parking are the most important.
So as it relates to that parking, that was the way I was going to lead you led me right to it. As it relates to our current zoning, if we utilize the current zoning, which my understanding is that for multifamilies with a unit that's 2 beds or less is 1.5 parking spaces per dwelling unit, and for 3 bedrooms or more is 2.
Okay.
Is the assumption that's being made in the model right now pass a sniff test? So let's start with that question to Ezra and Aaron in terms of, is that an adjustment we would need to make if we utilize what's currently existing?
Yeah. So down below, you can see there's the 1.5 right in the middle there, which is that's the number the model's using. Down below, they do want you to still specify if you're going to have something different for 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom. So we could do that. It won't change the model, but it will flag it, and they'll say, wait, how come you put 1.5 as the average when that's actually, only the studios and the 1 bedrooms get 1.5. So you're saying you'd go 1.5 parking for anything 2 bedrooms and lower?
So I'm not advocating for anything right now.
But what
I'm just
you have.
asking for what we have and how that would be treated, and that is treated as if 2 bedrooms and lower is 1.5. and then 3 bedrooms and up is 2 per dwelling unit.
So what they ask you to do is to sort of come up with some blended average based on what you think is reasonable. So what we might do is turn that 1.5 into a 1.66 or a 1.7. I don't think it's going to totally
Yeah,
take it.
Ezra, I played around with that last week while they were talking about that, because we did have kind of a lengthy discussion about parking and what that may look like. And the whole point of this district is, to be around transit, right? And hoping that people use the transit systems. But I did put in 1.75 and everything still returned where we still met the minimum count and things like that. So
Yeah.
um,
You're skirting right along the edge of the 15 units per acre for the density. So any of these changes that, tweak it a little bit are, they're going to cause me and Aaron to have to like look and say, well, are there any of these lots that, if we move the line this way or that way to capture, to cut out some overly big things or unbuildable things. But I think it can tolerate that. Yeah.
mhm.
And then are there any other things that you guys would need direction in order to finalize the model from an input perspective, besides obviously the actual map itself?
The last thing on the model is that one Aaron has right there, which
Mhm.
is lot area per dwelling unit. So we put that in at 1,000, which basically it almost doesn't do anything because we're capping them at 4,000. We're saying you need at least 4,000 square feet, and you can't build more than 4 units. So that's an irrelevant number.
Mhm.
But we could increase it. If you're really worried that some of these smaller lots are going to wind up with 4 families, if we increase that number, it would
Mhm.
mean some of them only get 3 families on them, right? The smaller, and we can certainly try that as a way, and maybe put it in, and then that's the first thing to go if we really need to squeeze compliance out of it. Depending on how the mapping works, we either have a cushion or we don't in terms of compliance. So,
So what we need from them today, just to go, is lot area, parking, that the
Yep.
main thing, setbacks, the building coverage, which I think we're all on the kind of the same page about.
Yeah.
The building height and lot size, minimum lot size.
Yep.
Okay. So I think that's very useful. What I'd ask, Aaron and Ezra, can we pivot over to the map and show what the last map was? And then based on this set of assumptions, kind of what that translates to in terms of performance. And then what I'd like to do is after that, I'd like to facilitate with the group talking about initial reactions to the proposed map. And then maybe we can go through each one of those individual items, talk about it as a working group, provide guidance to Aaron and Ezra as it relates to the policy decisions we need to make, such that we can finalize, and have the ability to finalize a map, finalize the calcs, so we're ready to submit to the state, once we actually have the balance of the zoning written, just so we can kind of check the box of having a compliant district. And then after that, I'd like to open the conversation around some other, conversations not related to compliance, related to other discretionary adds to the district. So I don't know, Aaron or Ezra, if it makes sense, either one of you can pull up the map that you guys presented and you kind of walk through what it looks like.
I just had it. Did you guys see it?
Yeah, it was there a second ago.
Where did it go? Sorry about that. So you want the newest one, right, Jim?
That is correct.
I can do it too if you want, Aaron.
Can you see it now?
No, we're still seeing the parking requirements.
Here we go.
Yep, there it is.
So before I'll let Aaron and Ezra run. So just for other folks, who may not recall, the orange, red, and I'll call it like gray zones were lots that were reviewed last meeting, and after review of those lots, which we thought may or may not have the ability to be compliant on their own, there was a discussion within the working group about this green, and I'll call it brown, on the eastern half of Main Street. And there was interest from the working group to include portions of those zones. So with that being said, I'll turn it over to, I don't know if Aaron or Ezra is the appropriate person to kind of walk through what you guys found as you went through those separate districts.
So I'll let Ezra take this, but I did notice, because we kind of were working on this last minute, is we do have the Main Street area, so these will be pulled off, these front lots here. So we'll just take that into account, but I don't think it's going to affect our numbers significantly. So
That's helpful. I was wondering
Yeah.
about that too when I had the thing that was sort of shaded in these large areas. But yeah, so and Aaron, just before we move over to the right side of the map, you all had already talked about extending that mustard yellow one up to the north and down to the ball field. Is that right? Like what's shown was what people had talked about before?
It is, but we were actually trying to maybe not do the southern end of the ball fields, thinking that it's further from the train, but wanted to
Okay.
see what it meant.
Okay. Yeah, and in some ways I think that was one of the most iffy parts of it, because it looks kind of like it totally makes sense to remove the ball field from it, but it becomes a kind of a questionable looking district in terms of it's sort of gerrymandered in some way. So I think if we were to remove that southern part, it might make even more sense. And we did include that part up to the north to grab a little more along the tracks there. So those are the first three. And then from your meeting last time, Aaron sent me the plan that included this green and the brown. We quickly threw those into the model as well, just as subdistrict D and E. They basically came in at about the same density as everything else. I mean, that you get, if you look at moving from the left to the right, you had about a little over 1,000 units in that big yellow district, about 430 in the upper, sorry, now what's the color? In the red, that was about 430, 231 down in the bluish one. So those three together got you just over what you needed of 1,700, or maybe just under, but right about that. If we add these two new ones, the upper one, the green, is 588 units. And the lower one, the brownish one, is only 148. These two new districts are slightly under in terms of density, in terms of the required units per acre. They're slightly under, but I think there's two reasons for that. One, in the green district, you see how there's these sort of large parcels right in the middle. Those are a lot of sort of town-owned stuff. I don't know if they're parks or schools or whatever, but you get no units out of them, but they cost you acreage so that they bring your density down. So if we were to remove the part on Main Street and maybe even pull the line all the way back to remove those large parcels, the density would go up and you wouldn't lose a lot of units. So you'd have another district of about 15 units per acre. And
You're
then
talking about this right here. This
exactly,
area,
yeah. If you kind of got rid of that whole like weird core that's kind of hollow.
Kind of between Main Street and Crescent for
Yeah,
those
exactly.
trying to follow along.
Yeah, so if you got rid of that whole little it's almost like an oval. Is that Crescent, the curved street?
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So from Crescent to Main, if you just remove that, which is largely town-owned property or big parcels that are only getting, think of any of those big parcels as only going to be a 4-unit building. It's kind of weird. And then probably when we did that, we'd also remove those two other really big ones on the right side of Crescent.
So that right there is like a affordable housing, Harts Hill here, and then I think, or I may have that wrong. This is a Brightview Senior. We just built that, and then our public safety building.
Yeah, so because those are such big parcels, they either get you nothing if they're town owned, or they show up as 4 units on a huge parcel, and it pulls your density down. So by removing them and really much more focusing on those, that kind of more regular pattern, I think you'll get the density you need. The brown one, you're not getting a whole lot of units down there. I think I said it was 143 or something. The density is a little low. It's just under 13, but that's partially because you see those long the long ones around I guess that's along the tracks or along a highway. They're sort of in the dark brown.
It's a rail trail.
That is the rail trail. That's a spur over there.
Mm-hmm.
So those really long ones they're owned by the T. They're not getting any units, and they're a huge amount of, they're probably 2 or 3 acres combined.
Oh.
So if we remove those, again, the density will go up to about 15, for those sort of regular looking parcels.
So,
So
would it be fair to say that if you remove those parcels that are, being denoted as it relates to the MBTA owned, and you just had it be the units that abut, the actual residential units, that you're probably going to be pretty close in terms of the density that we're talking about?
yeah, exactly. And you won't lose any units. You'll still have about 140 units there, and it will be about 15 units an acre. And remember, it looks like you limited it to the half a mile radius. You don't actually have to. If you wanted that Brown district to extend, to complete that block, yeah, exactly where she's mentioning, you can count those. You just can't have too much of the district out of that circle. But you have so much in it, you're fine.
And I'd even say maybe up here on the
Yeah.
kind of northeast, kind of
'Cause
closing
I-
out that.
I know there'd been some concern from one of the members about, let's not make districts where we can't tell what's in and what's out, and the district line splits. We can follow street lines up there. That'd be fine. And again, that would even help because all those somewhat regular parcels up there, those are good size. They're going to give you 4 units on a small lot. You're great. And they're not really intruding into, on the far left, we talked about the further out we went, the more we were sort of intruding on these kind of more quiet cul-de-sac-y streets. But I think on the right, to extend the green to just square off with streets, and the same with the brown, you're going to have a nice, tight, compact, walkable district for all those. I did want to ask about the triangle between the green and the brown.
Right here?
Yeah, that's like shopping center.
So
And
yeah, this is Water Street right here that you see I'm dragging. So like even these areas I would probably pull off. This is a commercial corridor here. We have a number of small businesses.
Good,
So,
okay.
and then same here, same. This,
Okay.
I would like to keep that within our kind of mixed use overlay. Yeah.
Okay, so that makes sense, I think. I think we're in good shape then. And the only other requirement is they do make sure that you can't have any district that's under 5 acres, but even that brown one is about 9 or 10, so you're fine.
So I wanted to pause for a second. Ezra and Aaron, thank you very much for the presentation and kind of updating in terms of what we're seeing from these things. I do want to, open an opportunity for the balance of the working group to kind of provide some feedback in terms of some initial thoughts as it relates to what you're hearing, some of the options that are being discussed, and what those impacts would be from a compliance perspective for this model.
So if we take out I'm just going to annotate, we take these out, right? Then we preserve that for multi-use as well, right?
Mhm.
Exactly, yes.
Which is what we want to do, I think. So, okay.
Yep. Yeah, and then kind of preserving that area he noted here too.
Yeah, definitely.
Mhm.
I really like this other side of Main Street. I know we talked about it last time. And I like the idea of kind of squaring it off so it makes sense on the roads.
Now, Ezra, this was, I guess I'm technically a working group member too. We talked about this as well, kind of, so we're pulling in more of these parcels over here on the northeast and the east side. And we could kind of, and we know we're kind of squaring it off here by the street, and that was a big conversation, but it could help us pull away from kind of these areas too. So we're kind of still following street lines, right? And we probably would still be able to meet those numbers.
Yeah, so
I
you
mean,
mean on the yellow one, the idea of pulling
Yeah.
it back to the big straight street? There.
Yeah, the Cedar Street area, or even this Walnut kind of.
Yeah, and that really I think helps rather than I do think you might want to think about, are you happier with things that follow street lines or that things that cover both sides of a street? There's 2 different
We talked about that, yeah.
approaches there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that there's some disagreement, or not disagreement, but there was some different lines of thinking related to that. Before we dive into another rabbit hole, though, I want to make sure that we give Greg and Robin the ability to kind of provide your initial thoughts as it relates to some of the things that we're talking about.
And just that was a great trick to actually use the annotation to point on the map. So hopefully others can figure that out as well.
I don't have any additional comments to what has been said. I think we're moving in the right direction as long as we can get the numbers, and probably a conversation in a few minutes, but speaking of the numbers, and if we are going to pull some of these districts in or in a different direction, we were talking about lot size per unit, our bylaw already has, the increased density transit oriented community. We use 750 within. I don't think we say a half mile. I think we say like 2,500 feet or something like that.
Yeah, we do.
Of a train station. So I assume going down 25% in lot area per dwelling unit would actually increase our or get us better numbers if we want to go that direction, just for reference for everyone else. We said 1,000 here. Our transit oriented that we did on our own, in 2015, has 750 square feet.
It's a funny one where it seems like it should make the numbers be better, but I don't think it'll affect them at all, because in order to have a lot in this model, it needs to be 4,000 square feet.
Okay, yeah.
Since you can only do 4, it would help if you made the lot area smaller also. If you said 3,000 is buildable, then you're getting really little.
Yeah.
I have a question about the, let's see if I can figure this out. This guy. So it's currently multifamily apartments. And so we're saying if that building came down, all it could be replaced with is a 4 unit. And given the fact that it's facing the train station, isn't that hurting us, that we're kind of decreasing, its value in terms of housing?
Remember, it's by right.
Right, I know, but it's also a big lot. What's that?
Yeah.
I think Robin's going where I was going, density.
So it kind of doesn't fit in with all the other units, all the other parcels where it's of a certain size and this is bigger and so forth. So just wondering if it should be excluded and seen more as the pressures, if that structure needed to get replaced, it got replaced kind of in kind in terms of density. That's all.
Sure. I mean, remember that this is just an overlay and your existing zoning would still be there. So
true.
So
I don't know, just
to
to
allow.
okay.
I mean,
I guess the question is that where we would want it, if for whatever reason that building came down, to Robin's point, do we want to have multifamily 3 or 4 family as of right be the default as of right, or would you rather encourage by not having it as of right?
Right, then you would have to come.
Where you have to go through some sort of discretionary, which would therefore make something mixed use, for example, more likely. Because I think that would be the desired outcome from an urban planning perspective.
No, that makes sense.
Additionally, I think that the density in terms of, sounds like the thing that's really one of our major constraints is the density of these individual zones or the overall overlay. And it's a large amount of acreage for not a lot of.
Yeah, which is this? I didn't see which one Robin was pointing at. Oh, that, yeah. So that would be, any of those really big ones. If we take them out without making it look like Swiss cheese, I think they'll help you. Yeah, and I think so. You've come up with a good policy reason for it, and it also helps your numbers. So yeah, that would be good to.
Yeah, I don't think anyone would accuse it of a Swiss cheese because we're not including the.
No, it's
the church doesn't get included, and the retail across the street from it doesn't. So it's kind of in keeping with the block.
Yep. Yeah, that sounds.
So if I'll take a crack at a couple observations. One, I do want to echo what Julie said. I think that this this area between Crescent or whatever. Now that I can't figure out how to use this tool, but that seemed to be a really good one to have. I also personally would advocate that we think about squaring this off, something like that. I don't know if people think that's kind of the right line to draw, or if there's, people think that it would be more appropriate to go the other way or bigger as it relates to the brown zone. I don't. Can people see that what I just drew on the screen? Okay.
Yeah. The squaring off seems very clear. I mean, and in terms of going bigger, you mean like going either one more block to the right or to the bottom?
Yeah. But I think that to me feels like that's kind of the natural zone, unless people think it wants to be smaller or go another block either way. But I'd love to hear if other people think that that's, kind of conceptually what we just drew is where we want to be.
The only reason I wouldn't say go a block the other way is from a town meeting passability standpoint. At some point, there is going to be a, balancing a lot of people say, well, let's do them, you know, I think we've already seen people who say we shouldn't do anything. So although I wholeheartedly disagree with that, obviously we can't do that. Yeah, I mean, if we're already blowing past the numbers, just adding another block, you know, maybe we won't be blowing past the numbers once we start taking out sort of that downtown area. But if we already are, you know, excessively past our numbers or our minimum numbers, I don't think we should be. I think we're going down a slippery, dangerous path, I guess I should say.
Right.
Unless we're talking about it from a different perspective, when we were talking about, you know, the sort of, we'll do this for the MBTA, and then there's other areas we'll look at from a, you know, sort of equity standpoint.
So I'm going to take the silence to mean that I think other people agree with Greg, and frankly, I do too.
Yeah,
Oh,
I mean,
go for
I
it.
definitely do. I think if we did have to go, I would do this here, right? Rather than go
Yeah.
further out here. So, but yeah, if we don't need the numbers, then we don't have to.
Okay.
One other thing, just to throw out there, I know I want to hear what everyone's saying, but do remember that even though it looks like we're sort of moving further away from the station area here, we're also, this is the side of the station area that's close to the downtown. You know, that yellow area is the one that's sort of moving. The station is not in the center of the town, the center of the commercial area is the problem. So in some ways, this brown and the green are actually more centrally located, and I think it's not a bad idea to say that's where you want this stuff.
Although Ezra, the bus line is on the right side. Well, there's now a loop, so it actually is supported by
Even better, yeah.
yeah. So there's an argument of the multi-modal.
Yeah, in fact, the only place that the bus goes both ways is right here, I think.
Right. Yeah, so that's great.
So I think that direction in terms of the Brown district makes a ton of sense. The other one that I wanted to get people's thoughts on, and where my head immediately went to, but just to see if there's consensus, is as it relates to the green, having it come squaring off along, I think this is Pleasant, if I recall, and then doing something like this, where you're kind of coming down here, you know, having it extend a little farther east, while again excluding kind of this whole area right here. That all kind of goes away. Does that seem like that fits with what people were talking about, or are there any particular components of that jogging that people think don't make sense?
I don't see the jog as valuable, and if you have a strong datum of prospect, then I would stay with it.
So square it off like this, and
Yes.
get rid of this one.
Yes.
Let me keep that up there so I can just get a quick photo of that.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
So I think you know between Crescent and Maine that goes away.
I
And
also
then-
just want to be mindful of that area too. These areas, this is Vernon, right? And so these are commercial districts right here. So this corner lot too. So I don't want to lose that as a commercial storefront area. It kind of turns over here, I believe, if I'm looking at our zoning map too for the business. So something to be mindful of. It turns over right here to general residence, but right here is all business.
So you'd want to have kind of this zone right here be excluded somehow. These kind of-
Similar to what we did on the other commercial corridors.
I would personally, from an economic development perspective, but
So I open it up to other members of the working group. Do people feel as if that's the direction we'd want to try to pursue for this in order to maintain those corridors for commercial activity?
That's consistent. So
that actually leads me to my next. I think the way we would do that is we do an offset of, you know, call it 100 feet or whatnot off of those mid corridors, and then if you're not 100% within the district, you're out of it,
right?
For lack of a better term. So then the other question I wanted to bring to this group is as it relates to kind of this zone right here, kind of a similar thought, right? You know, do we want to think about having an offset off of that portion of, I think it's still Maine, right? where it continues to kind of veer to the east before it hits Lake Quannapowitt. For the purposes of maintaining a commercial base.
But
It's
is
already
that
kind of
commercial? Isn't
residential
that
there.
housing?
Yeah,
That's where
currently
the
right
church
now,
is. And
I think it's a
That area-
mix.
that area is zoned general residence currently. Basically from Park Street, which is right here, to up here is all general residence. So I would personally vote to keep that as residence, so along the lake, but that's just my opinion.
Would agree.
I agree. I wouldn't make it feel like it's future intendance is commercial if we don't currently have an overlay of commercial there.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's commercial businesses there, so.
Okay.
And what about this one right here?
Which one is that? That small little guy
No, above, one up from there.
right here?
The large one just beyond the island. Go up,
Well-
up, up.
The large one is the apartments, isn't it?
I believe, yeah, there's already apartments, and then this one, I think it's a church. Am I correct? Isn't there a church right there with the daycare?
Yep.
Yeah, those two
Correct.
large lots.
Okay. So those are all okay to keep in, you're saying?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay.
So then the next one I wanted, and I apologize if I'm just kind of jumping around, but I'm just trying to identify and make sure we're providing clear direction to Ezra and Aaron as they're going through their modeling exercise. The zone around here, to me personally, looks like it kind of sticks out as it's along Albion, right? But feels like Albion A might want to be more commercially focused in the future, and B, it's to kind of draw that in a manner that doesn't look, for lack of a better term, gerrymandered. Seems like it might be a bit of a challenge. So I wanted to pose to the group, does this section here make a lot of sense as it relates to the zone, or do we think, no, that makes sense and we want to make sure that we keep it?
That's the laundromat that's turning into housing in one of those lots, right?
Mixed use, yeah. Right here.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep, and then I think these are residential, if I'm correct.
I think they're all multifamily, like larger scale.
It is a little odd that it's half partial block to be, so taking it off. If we don't need it, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, if we're adding this green and the brown, we don't need all these little. I mean, we remember we were squeezing for just to hit the line with all these, but now we don't need them. Let's make it cleaner and make it. I think that's the benefit here.
Yeah. So then the kind of similarly, right? This one I'm gonna mark just as an X. This one to me feels as if it doesn't make a ton of sense unless people disagree. Just being on the one corner. And then the question becomes around the Gould Street, around the ball field. Does it make sense where kind of anything kind of west of this line all kind of goes away? And then the question is, do we keep everything to the east of it? Or do people feel as if what we have currently presented, we'd want to keep?
I'm not sure where to make the transition, but I think us talking about not having the entire park surrounded makes sense. I do have a question. Why is this lot not included? Isn't that a house
Where are you?
right here?
Isn't that the west side?
No,
that is
The
house,
west side
right.
is right here, but I thought I know the person in that house unless they're the corner lot.
Oh, the big
That's why.
there.
Yeah, there
What's
is
that?
a house there.
Yeah. Probably just I assumed it was.
Okay,
For some reason, I think I assumed that the ball field had a road through it, which doesn't really make sense.
yeah,
It looked
no, the
like, it looked
diamond
like a
is.
baseball field. It's sort of like Fenway Park now with a.
There is no ball. I mean, they play soccer and stuff, but there's no mound.
Yeah, so you could include that. I mean, that it's unfortunately a large lot, and it's gonna, hurt your density a little bit. But
No, I think
No,
Ezra.
it's
So
a small lot.
inside the green, there's a lot.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
So
the
this is the
tiny
lot to
green.
add. This is
Okay.
the town-owned land on this, so that you
Oh,
don't
okay.
include that.
But there's
this-
a tiny one in there. Good.
Yeah.
Got it. Good. Okay, so that's fine. It probably might even be too small to be buildable under the new zoning, but let's include it anyways. That's fine. Good. But leave out that gray corner. I did that right?
Yeah, that's the west side, right?
Mhm.
That's correct.
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
across that street is the baseball field.
Right here.
Well,
Yeah.
it's just open field, tennis court, basketball.
There's a baseball
Exercise.
field there.
But we're removing all these.
Yes.
Well, so I
Alright.
think Ezra, that's the question, right?
Yeah.
Is
We don't know if we
every-
can.
Sorry, what was that, Robin?
We don't know if we can, if we have enough units to offset removing all of it.
Yeah. I mean, I think you probably do because we even just the yellow, red, and blue were close. That was pretty much what you needed. And then we added the green and the brown. And now we're making the green and the brown even a little bigger. But if you didn't have the green and the brown, you're pretty much where you need to be anyways. So we can chop up that yellow as
Okay.
as much as you like, I think. I think right now you're over almost 700 units more than you need.
Okay, then I would
With
say
color.
somewhere a line like that. So it doesn't,
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, that would be important for us to know where we're drawing this line today.
Yeah. So I guess the question is that, if we're looking at this, are there any, and look, I'm not the only person who can find a parcel that I think looks weird. Is there anything else, like Robin mentioned earlier with that multifamily we have in X right now that's not currently marked up on the screen that people want to say either larger, smaller, don't like, or have any other comments related to any of these proposed districts and how we're drawing this? Because otherwise, what I would propose for the group is we consider having this as our direction from a map perspective to Ezra and Aaron. We make the other conversations related to the other dimensional elements, and then we try to validate if that's compliant, and then we'll have a compliant map we can model against, and then start our zoning drawing effort.
that works for me.
Same.
Okay. Well, in that case, if you just bear with me for a second, I also, like Ezra, would like to just get a quick snippet of this, just so I've got it for my records. And then after that, what I propose we do is we go to, can we fall back to that model? And then we can kind of go back to all the different dimensional
Wait,
elements. Oh,
sorry, for us, don't we want to try to figure out what we're including and what we're not including here in this yellow portion? We've kind of had this conversation of,
No, I think we're including everything we're showing except for where we do lines to exclude.
so get rid of this,
Yep.
this, and this. That was the,
okay,
does that make sense, Aaron? Or if we're not clear, feel free to speak up right now.
no, it's fine. It's fine. Does that look good to you, Ezra?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly clear. I mean, I guess I just want to be sure that, like, if you were to look at from the area we just chopped out and look for the next sort of 2 blocks between that and moving towards the right, I don't think you necessarily need any of that. All that stuff. I mean, or certainly the stuff in the upper half, where there's that weird L-shaped and then the kind of curved, there. All that stuff can disappear if you want, if you think that makes a better district.
So we talked about that last time, Ezra, and the
Okay.
consensus started to form around that for that boundary of that West District, that there was an interest in maintaining the zoning on both sides of that street.
Got it. Okay.
Was the consensus as it relates to that specific zone. So that was the thought process.
That makes sense. And I think this does have a kind of parity on left and right. So we can certainly work with this. It's also probably better to go into town meeting with something that is a little more than you need, just in case people start chopping things out. So.
That was
Yeah.
the other thought process.
Yeah, I also just didn't know this area here where, if we just, I thought we talked about Cedar Street area being kind of, but I'm probably mistaken.
Yeah, we talked about whether Cedar, and then it was the units around Cedar on the other side, north of Chestnut. And then I think Greg brought up a good question of, if people were to question between Chestnut and Gould, why would you potentially have an extra block? And the argument was that that's a very flat walkable block with really quality access to Wakefield
Okay.
Junction. And then the question just becomes, you know, do we keep it as is? Do we potentially lose the units, you know, that last set of them? Do we potentially lose that last block? I think it gives us a little bit of an ability to play with it if we need to
Okay.
at a future date.
Sounds good.
So I do want to get, you know, anyone has any other questions on any of this map stuff, you know, I think it's very important that we're all in alignment with what we're talking about. You know, are there any other things that look odd, don't make sense, you know, potentially, you know, on the gray zone, for example, is, you know, something like this worth having a conversation around, or are people comfortable with what we've got right now?
I'm comfortable for now. I mean, we're kind of doing this all without, you know, feedback from more folks, but as a starting point for conversations, I'm good.
Okay. So in that case, you know, what I'd ask is, you know, if we can model based on that, you know, marked up direction, you know, please let us know if there's any other things that we need to do. And then I'd love to fall back on the, some of those dimensional considerations. So I think what I heard was the big one is the lot size, parking, and then secondarily the setbacks. And then depending on those decisions, it's the units per dwelling acre. So in terms of the lot size, I'd love to just open it up. You know, what we have right now for everyone's reference is we've got the 4,000 is the assumption and is what's baked into the model right now. And if you bear with me for a second, I'll pull up the screen for, if people can see my screen, it's got what is the baseline zoning for those who may not be as familiar. Right now, the general residence, which is where these units primarily would be zoned, is 8,000 in the base. It's 4,000 for the mixed use overlay that was passed approximately 10 years ago. So, you know, I want to open it up to the group, you know, get people's feedback. You know, we have 4,000 as the baseline. Do people feel comfortable with that? Do people feel as if there's an adjustment that should be considered while we're going through this modeling effort to validate and make sure that what we have is in compliance?
Ezra, you said that a lot of the lots within these boundaries are 4,000 currently, right?
Yeah, the majority of them are. I mean, I can tell you the model reports out how many you lose. And so like in the big district, you know, the big yellow one, there are 17 parcels that don't meet that threshold.
Because they're smaller.
Yeah. So you have 300 parcels and 17 of them, about 6%, are too small. But that's a pretty small number, you know.
At the 4,000 square foot?
Yeah, exactly. If you looked at you know, some of the other ones are even fewer. You know,
there's like 4 at District 1,
yeah,
2 at District 2.
So you're not
17.
losing a lot. And you can basically see as you get further away from the sort of from the center of town, you do get some of the bigger parcels, as well as some of these ones we've noticed and cut away. So,
I mean, I'm okay with the 4,000. Also, again, from an explainability standpoint, it's consistent with the mixed use overlay already. We're not doing anything or treating it any different. You know, it's almost like we're just adding on some of the MBTA requirements, but otherwise keeping it the same as much as possible.
Julie or Robin, do either one of you have a reaction to that or a strong feeling one way or the other? Okay. So in that case, I'll be honest, Greg, I was going to say basically the same thing. I think it's from a consistency perspective, I think that makes a lot of sense. So I think Ezra, Aaron, I think what I'm hearing is a strong consensus to keep it with the current model that we were talking about. The kind of similarly, just along the lot size, are people comfortable with those maximum building coverages, you know, all those different ratios that we're talking about, like 35% and such, that are again consistent with all the different elements in the base zoning. I feel like that probably, it sounded like there wasn't a lot of pushback or want for a conversation around that. So if that's the case, then we can probably just make that decision, provide that direction, unless I hear an objection.
No, I like the consistency of it.
Okay. So then the next one, which I think is probably going to be the biggest impact, is parking. So right now, sounds like we'd have to make a slight adjustment to the model. It sounds like from a compliance perspective with the state, it's not going to be a major risk as it relates to us being able to achieve it, from what I'm hearing from Aaron and Ezra, and you can correct me if I'm completely wrong. But I think the question that we need to ask ourselves is, do we want to have this district have the same parking requirements as the base zoning for within town, which is, and I will pull it up right here. It's, basically what we're looking at is we're looking at these multifamily dwellings with 2 beds and fewer having 1.5 per dwelling unit, 3 beds or more 2. So we probably, to Ezra's earlier point, 1.6, 1.7 model it at. But do people feel strongly one way or the other that the current parking within the underlying zoning is something we'd want to move off of? Or I think what I've heard is consistency is as people's baseline in terms of the balance of the zoning choices.
I'm fine with it. I guess when I'm looking at the lot sizes and just like the reality of how big these units are going to be, they're not going to fit more than 2 bedrooms. So, the 1.5 is going to be the typical. I think maybe some of the brown sites may have, larger units and so forth, and maybe the 2 makes sense. So maybe that sub-district can have that rule of the more parking, but the stuff that's tighter, you're not going to fit that many bedrooms.
And from a practicality standpoint, even on the very large sites, builders just don't build 3-bedroom apartments often, very few. And I think even at that, the only 3 bedrooms I can remember are 40Bs, which require 3 bedrooms. There might be 1 or 2, or maybe less than 5 in Harvard Mills, but I think most of those were studios and 1 bedrooms. And they had the run of, they could build anything they want in there, and they just didn't build 3 bedrooms.
Which brings up a good question, because one of the bullet points of you're saying that many people, like with the families, like there's no age restrictions within this law and suitable for families with children. So are we eliminating that, do you feel like, with the 2 bedrooms? I guess you could have 1 or 2 children in a 2-bedroom, but like you were just saying with 40Bs, they like having 3 bedrooms to fit families.
But we're not saying you can't have 3 bedrooms.
You're just
Okay.
Yeah. And when
It's just, they just don't
in terms
build
of
them often.
the model is sort of kicking them out, assuming that the typical apartment is 1,000 square feet. So it's not imagining like huge apartments. They're not micro apartments, but they're not like 4 single family houses stacked up on top of each other. I mean, I think it sort of understands apartments are different from houses.
So
we
what
should
are we
be aware,
saying?
it's not just apartments, they can be condos, so they can be homeowners.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So can you just walk me through what we're thinking on the parking again?
So Julie, I think the baseline is, if we match the existing parking zoning within town, any unit, any dwelling unit that has 2 bedrooms or fewer, you have to have 1.5 cars per dwelling unit, and any dwelling unit with 3 bedrooms, you'd have to have 2. So for example, for our zoning, you could have a 3-story building with a maximum of 4 3-bedroom units, which would then make it so you'd need what is it? You would need
8.
Did
you say 4 3-bedroom?
Yeah, 4 times 2. But what Greg was indicating was that in his experience on the ZBA, builders in general have not been moving towards 3
I
beds.
definitely understand that. I guess I feel pretty strongly that we should be building less parking, because this is an MBTA, this is supposed to be around public transportation. This is our opportunity, and maybe it's not vastly different. I don't know how the half units work, but I would really like to discuss less parking.
I agree. My only question with that again goes to passability. But no matter the data we show people at ZBA meetings, the very first topic everyone complains about is parking.
Which is so ironic because the second thing they complain about is traffic.
Yep.
But we're not saying they can't provide more parking. We're just saying that they're not
They
obligated
won't,
to
they
provide it.
won't, they won't provide more parking because then that takes away from, you know, this building coverage and open space, the setbacks. So it is a Tetris of fitting it all in. So very few. So it's funny that we're talking about this and people complain about parking. We give, and people say we throw out variances. We give very few variances on parking, if any, and they might be mostly on 40Bs because we have to. But very few are able to fit more than is required. To make all the other, you know, to get as less relief as possible, you know, so they can have as much open space and have it, so.
And are the complaints coming from the developers or from the neighbors who say they're gonna be parking in my yard if they don't have parking? That's
Neighbors, yeah.
right.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think any developer who you offer the option to build less parking will say, please and
Yeah.
thank you.
yeah.
I just feel like the trend is going towards less parking, but I get it. I get it.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think we should, I mean, the data, you know, especially in transit related, with a town that has Erin that's working on, what did you call it? The transportation demand.
Microtransit type.
I mean, we had our town council retreat last night and talked a lot about, you know, setting up a transit committee and talking about all these things.
Yeah, and with, you know, what is it, CCNF coming in that has said they will, this is in their decision that they will help, you know, all this stuff. So I agree. In my mind, if we were going to move off this at all, it would be to the lower. I mean, I don't know if we could go past just keeping it at a total of 1.5 per dwelling unit, no matter how many bedrooms, simply from a explaining it. Because Ezra, we can't really, if I heard you right in earlier meetings too, we can't really link it to, or it's at least a risk to link it to just say the rest, you know, the required parking in this area is whatever the town says in the bylaw at the moment. Because if we change it, which could happen, I know they're reviewing this right now, I have no idea what if they've even talked about it, then you have to go back to the state.
Yeah, you're going to want to have it its own thing
Hardwired in here.
Yeah, it's sort of like snip it out. It's an overlay. That's what applies here. Okay. You know,
I could live with 1.5 regardless of size of bedrooms.
And that really will likely reflect the vast majority
Right.
of realistic
Right.
development.
I mean, you know that just from your experience, but I think it would at least get it through.
Yeah.
So I think what I'm hearing is that there's a consensus around 1.5, at least for now. Maybe we have a conversation at a later date, depending on what other people in town say about trying to go down. But 1.5 seems like what we would do is we'd have for parking required as part of this bylaw or this overlay would be 1.5 flat. And if questioned, and we could talk about it at a future date, the argument would be, while the working group thinks that less might be more appropriate, we feel as if 1.5 is reasonable. We think the vast majority of this development is going to be 2 beds, and that if anything, as a separate conversation, planning board, zoning recodification, et cetera, that they can pick up the hot topic of parking for the town writ large.
And this is in keeping with transit-oriented development. That is the MBTA Communities Act.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Honestly, if we were trying to stay as consistent with MBTA communities, we'd lower it, or further. But the question just becomes, can you pass it?
Yeah.
but yeah, I think 1.5 sounds good. Okay.
I think you'd be surprised what you can pass in Wakefield with enough
Fair enough.
mobilization.
And then I think the last one I just wanted to double check on is, I know that there were a number of kind of blanket setbacks that were listed for 30, 30, 30 for front, side, and rear.
Yeah, I'd like us to go to the 15, 10, 20.
I
Okay,
agree.
that was what I was gonna ask.
And
if
it's,
people
and it's
were-
more at least on the large orange area where I live, it's more consistent with what's here. So why would we want a new unit to be set back further? It just would be actually out of character to the neighborhood.
Just to take it, one argument could be, well, if it is going to be a larger development, yes, it's not going to be the huge, Tarrant Lane development, but if it is a larger building, you want it set back a little bit further. It's just an argument. I agree with you that we should keep it as the 2015.
It is an argument, but we're still only 35 feet.
Yeah, no,
so
agreed.
yeah, if it was definitely higher, then yeah, you do offer, shadows and comfort of, tight streets, but why should we make it deeper than what most of this district already has?
Okay,
Also, to the extent it helps, I'm realizing now we put in 30, 30, 30 because we took it from the multiple residence, which is, that's looking at 40,000 square foot lots where
Right, yeah.
30 feet is like tiny little buffer around the edge.
and also, Ezra, just so you know, the MR district doesn't actually exist in
Yeah,
town on any maps, so it doesn't have a ton of applicability. It's actually been earmarked for removal at the bylaw review committee.
yeah.
Ooh.
So the nice thing is that you'll basically be keeping pretty much that entire line, 80 frontage, 15, 10, 20 on the setbacks, 3 stories, 35 feet, 35%, 30% open space. The only difference is the use you can do and the by right for this.
I think that being able to say we're keeping everything else consistent with the exception of the lot area, which is consistent with the mixed use overlay. It's consistent with the existing overlay and existing with the underlying zoning for everything else. I think that's a compelling starting point as it relates to the dimensional.
I think that's right. You may need to get rid of the 80-foot frontage because I don't know if many of the lots are that. But
I'm on Auburn, which is what that little cut through street that you see between Emerson and Cedar, and we meet it. So
okay, they don't.
There are exceptions,
model.
but I don't think it's too many.
Okay, I mean it's not in the model, so I don't really know how I'm supposed to advise other than, I think if you're keeping what you have, let them tell you can't do it, I guess. So.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So in that case, I want to be cognizant of trying to make sure that you guys have what you need in order to finish the model so we can confirm compliance. Is that, I think we've checked all the boxes in terms of the direction you guys need, but please let me know if you disagree.
I feel good about what we got. There are a couple questions, but I don't think they're for now, but I just want to let you know. One was, you mentioned the idea of site plan review. You can't prevent it has to be by right, but you can still ask for review to make sure certain things are tended to. And the other question is whether you want to include something like a special permit to vary on the dimensional requirements, or that's something sometimes you'll have it elsewhere in your zoning. If you is it always a variance if you can't meet the requirement, or is it a special permit process ever? But we can put those aside for later. But I think what we needed for the model, we definitely have it, especially if this map all works. Erin, are you good?
I'm good. Yeah, I was just playing around with some of the numbers. Yeah, we'll have to talk.
Okay.
Okay. So then if I'm looking at the agenda in terms of the other things that we wanted to talk about, I know that there was some interest at the last meeting about, so we have what we just finished talking about, the compliance zone for the state. There was some interest in other portions of town in terms of what I would call a discretionary additional section of the zoning, which would be added not for the purposes of complying with the MBTA section 3A, but rather because we think it's good policy, and it's because it would be able to add an equity lens in terms of where in town we'd be having overlay districts. So I wanted to take a step back. My understanding is Greenwood was an area that we wanted to talk about. I wanted to talk about kind of some of those areas, and maybe we could have Aaron create a map similar to what we just went through, so we could facilitate some of those conversations. Additionally, I wanted to identify if there's other locations within the town, if people have an interest. I pulled up a copy of our current zoning. So, I'm interested in understanding what other people's thoughts are. And so we can start kind of trying to nail down some of those potential other locations within the town that we might have this overlay district apply to.
So I have a quick foundational question on that, and I guess it is what is our sort of mandate or authority as this subgroup? Are we, I don't know, maybe I'm getting too lawyerly on this. Are we stepping out of our bounds is that more of a policy decision that needs to be driven by some other group, whether it be the bylaw review committee, I don't know what their mandate is, or the planning board in general, or were we convened simply to look at MBTA Communities Act, or is it wide open? I don't know. Just a question, because I agree with the thought process, but I don't want to go down the route and then have it sort of blow up in our faces after doing a lot of work. And that could also affect something that we are required to do.
That's been kind of a concern of mine. I'm totally for creating more of these districts. We all know we've been seeing a number of these developments happen naturally through the special permit process. I'm afraid that it could possibly, when we presented this to the town council and these various groups, it was just for the MBTA communities, not looking at housing in general or multifamily housing for the community as a whole outside of MBTA communities. And I just wouldn't want you guys to be put in the hot seat, selfishly myself as well. But I would love to hear what everyone else has to say.
I guess honestly,
part of what that comes from, there is a lot of heavy lifting that once we sort of nail down what we think, there is a lot of heavy lifting that'll have to go into meetings and stuff to pass what's even required. So I don't know, that's where I started and then came up with, that sort of mandate question.
I guess I was looking at Lexington as an example. They took this opportunity to like reconsider some, zoning as related to housing as a way to improve the town.
But I guess it's a process question,
which was
right?
a huge risk. Yeah, because they went,
I agree with that outcome, but it's basically an authority or a mandate question. That may have been done through an entirely different process. That may have been through the planning board or through a board appointed for that reason. I just want to make sure that we're not sort of overstepping our bounds and then it becomes an issue.
I wonder if looking at Greenwood, because it is near MBTA, is within our ability discussion, but anything outside of that would be seen as overreaching because it's no longer attached to mass transit.
So if I pause everyone for a second, just kind of how we got to where we got to, right? So this has been something that we've talked about more times than I care to admit, for what I was calling the talking about phase. There was a strong interest in convening a working group to review what would be required to comply with the state as a bare minimum. At the time, there wasn't really a lot of conversations around additional discretionary zones. That wasn't part of the explicit we're convening an MBTA working group to ensure that we're going to have compliance with the requirements from the state. With that being said, there was definitely a strong indication that a zone around Greenwood would be considered as part of that. In fact, they were representative, not that this is a proposal, but this is something we could be considering as it relates to Wakefield Junction and around Greenwood, just for the purposes of it. There were conversations around, whether or not we would be trying to do something for the bare minimum for compliance. That was not something that was promised, in terms of bare minimum for compliance. I think that there's probably a strong argument to be made as it relates to other zones for, not around the two stations. in terms of, that may be overseeding or overstepping. That being said, if that's something that this group's interested in, those are a series of conversations that we could probably, endeavor to have with the other relevant boards and folks who may have an opinion on the process.
Yeah, I guess my opinion is I just want to make sure we're not going down an area that we weren't, then we take it back to whoever. I can't even remember who could veto us, if it was a town council or a planning board subcommittee. I can't quite remember, but yeah, if we do all this work and then we go down and it comes out to, what are we doing here? Like, this is, you were convened for any of this. This is a policy change that needs to be discussed at different levels, or even if we just need to make sure, hey, we're thinking about doing this too. Is that okay? Or, I'm usually of the type to, do it and then ask for forgiveness, but just wanted to make sure.
I mean, I think there's a lot of talk around town about, and again, at the town council last night, there was a lot of talk about kind of multifamily housing, also around affordability, right? And housing for disability, just some creative things, even talking about kind of multi-generational housing and all those kinds of things. I don't know whether I don't think this really solves any of that, but I'm pretty comfortable around the Greenwood area because of the MBTA connection.
Now, just so I understand, when we package this together, if we do, I agree, understand with the Greenwood, I'm comfortable with that because of the MBTA commuter rail there, and we did kind of say that when we introduced this whole process to the different boards, we would package this separately when we go to town meeting, correct? Because this would go back to, what we have to report to the state and things like that. So it would just be a different district where maybe we could get a little more creative, that we're not bogged down with kind of the compliance with MBTA.
And I can sort of weigh in just slightly to say it's sort of beyond my role as technical assistance here. You're getting into sort of more town politics, and I could totally see there's arguments for doing a broader thing and arguments for doing a focus thing. I do really want to just stress the importance of whatever we submit to the state really should just sort of stand on its own feet and, be kind of clear that that's what it is and that's what you're getting compliance based on. And to the extent that sort of affects people in town into thinking, you might just want to be aware that they don't feel you're trying to expand and then you get nothing. Like, I want to be sure we lock this baby down, but.
Yeah, I think that from how you package it to get perspective, I think the thought that we had talked about as a group, but if we don't think that's the right manner, was that you would potentially have the same overlay, basically rules apply to whatever districts are included, and then you'd only hive off the component around Wakefield Junction and submit that to the state. So theoretically, even if the same map had the same overlay with the two different components, you would have, all the same, basically, I think all the same lot size, minimums, parking, setbacks, all of those, frontage, all of those would all be the same. And then it's just a matter of your packaging up just the Wakefield Junction section, sending that off, and then you have the two other components, Wakefield plus Greenwood would be the same overlay. But I think it's an open question whether or not the thought would be to submit it all once to town meeting or to submit it in two separate sections. I think there's been some thoughts back and forth in terms of what would be the most appropriate and what would be the most likely in terms of a passing perspective.
So I guess that opens another question then, especially with what Julie said was discussed. Would you say last night or something at town council? What I heard you say is it would essentially be the same, but it'd be a different area and not submitted, but same requirements. Whereas it seems like policy discussions, or not even just thought that could lead to policy discussions is going in a different area to be more creative, to be for, I don't know, what, affordability and multi-generational housing or something. So it seems like we might be getting ahead of ourselves, especially when there is conversation already happening at a level that could inform us. And maybe it is the same group later, but when we get better direction. Rather than saying, here's the formulaic piece we're going to use, there's no affordability component. It's the same as the MBTA, but it's in these other areas simply because we want to be equitable. And then 2 years later say, oh, now we want to change it because we're trying to be more creative. Or we want to add affordability or whatever it is.
Yeah, we just, and I don't really, I have to admit, I am not super up. We just, and maybe Ezra, you know, we just became a housing trust community.
A housing choice community.
Housing choice, right, Aaron?
Yes.
I don't know how that affects all of this, except that like we haven't even kind of set up our rules around that or our group around it. And there was a lot of talk of that.
Oh, sorry. The affordable. So we just created a affordable housing trust as
Yeah.
well as a became designated a housing choice community. And something that I just applied for was for a housing production plan, which is no longer certified, where the things that we're talking about right now could be addressed within that plan.
So maybe, you know, maybe that does kind of reinforce what Greg is saying.
Because if you look at our plan from 2015, 2020, it does talk about affordability, but it also talks about other parts of town where you could see multifamily development areas that you could create more housing. And I know a number of the things that they talk about in that document, we've kind of checked off those boxes. So again, I know it's a planning process, but it might give us some more meat to why we're choosing certain areas and ways that we could get more creative in certain districts that we can in others.
And some of those things are actually, you know, the housing production plan takes a while to go into effect. Essentially, some of those things are happening now, like the Mike's Gym area was specifically called out for development. I think the head of the lake was specifically called out for development. So, yeah,
and our inclusionary zoning came out of that.
Zoning came out of that. So it is a
good tool.
Although I agree that, you know, that we should look into, you know, opening this up to other areas. It just seems like we might be getting ahead of ourselves with the master plan and envision all going on, which will inform the housing production plan and all that stuff.
I hear what you're saying, but I feel like there would be a missed opportunity if we didn't do anything around Greenwood, just because the intent.
But I guess my point is, it's not for us to decide whether it's a missed opportunity. If we want to come up with or maybe we even go back to planning board and town council right now and say, do you want us to look at these areas? Rather than come up with this full thing that essentially, as you said, Jim, is going to be the exact same as this MBTA Communities Act results. When it might be a missed opportunity for this group, but when there's a whole broader discussion in master development plan, the housing production plan, the affordable housing trust, housing choice community, all kind of coming together, but then just this group saying, well, listen, we want to do this here because we already kind of found numbers that work in other areas. I hear what you're saying.
But I guess what my point is that when we originally convened as a working group, we identified Greenwood as the spot that we wanted to make sure we added. The only reason we're not proceeding with it is because the existing lot sizes would have necessitated a density that we didn't feel was consistent with the character of that neighborhood. And so I hear what you're saying in terms of, you know, are we getting ahead of ourselves? But I think that it was a portion of the zoning that was always under consideration from the outset. It's adjacent to the MBTA zone, and it is consistent from a policy perspective with what is being done around Wakefield Junction, and the only reason it's not being submitted for strict compliance with the state is because it would necessitate a change to the underlying policy decision that, you know, we were going down the path until the lot sizes would necessitate us to upsize the density. So I don't think
Three
it's,
stories and 4 units worked in the junction area, but didn't work here, right?
yeah, I mean, if the three stories and the 4 units worked within Greenwood, we'd be having 2 zones around Wakefield Junction, around Greenwood, for a compliance model perspective. And we'd be submitting that. The only reason we're not is because of the density requirements as set forth by the state.
I agree with everything you said, but it didn't work, and to me, that's not, I guess that's not an issue. If we can do something beyond what the MBTA, because we were looking at it for the MBTA Communities Act. If we can do something better there, then why not do that rather than, hey, we were looking at it at the beginning, it didn't work. Now we're going to make something work because we were looking at the beginning. It changed in my mind, and I don't think that's a problem. We're doing what we, it's a fluid issue to try to make something meet for the MBTA Communities Act. If we can do something better in any area of town without keeping simply that mandate in mind, to me, that's a positive, that's a plus. And if we can get better direction now, if we get direction from somebody that says, no, just do it because that's, you were thinking about it at the beginning, sure, that's great. But simply because it had to fall out because it couldn't meet the density isn't a problem in my mind. We might be able to do something better is I guess is what I'm
And I guess
getting at.
something I can throw out to this group too, I'm going in front of the town council, I believe in the beginning of July, to discuss where we're at with the MBTA communities. And so I could show everything that we discussed here with the updated map, doing the presentation that I did for you guys last time, but updated, and talk about how we are in compliance within this Wakefield station area. But when we first came to this group, we discussed possibly looking at the Greenwood area as well. And this is why we didn't meet it, but would you like us to still consider that area, or what Greg was just alluding to, or do we hold on to it and try to think of different creative ways that does not fit within this MBTA community?
I think the same question should be asked of the planning.
Well, yeah,
board.
both. Oh, exactly. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, and I can ask it even before July, Aaron,
Okay.
if
That'd
we
be
want direction before that.
Yeah, and if
And
that's the direction,
I did mention it at our kind of planning meeting last night, that this was an option we were looking at of maybe kind of going beyond the statutory.
I think that would be really helpful if we all went back to our respective boards, maybe, and asked this question.
Julie, what was the reaction?
Oh, it was just really, we were all throwing out kind of our wish
Oh,
lists
okay.
for the year. So we were not reacting to each other's stuff, but I did put it on the table.
Yeah.
So, and then I guess my ask would be, is it a little bit direction too, is to, if we're compliant somewhere else, can we do something to be creative here and not just say, hey, it's the same.
Mhm.
It's the same as the MBTA Communities Act requirements. Because to me, then that doesn't make sense.
What doesn't make sense?
Saying we meet it here. We know we need, I don't know, more affordable housing or whatever, but
Yeah.
we're just going to keep the same requirements and put them here also.
Right. No,
Without at least adding, like, keeping the regular affordability component or adding in, I don't know, I can't think of anything.
I can say, I mean, as the guy who's supposed to be here to get you a compliant district, I will say, I'll be the first to admit, I don't actually think the state's framework is necessarily the best framework either for creating a neighborhood that you like or producing a lot of units. Actually, I think there's better approaches for both of those. It's just, it gets into a far more complicated thing, and they needed a one size fits all. Like, it's sort of like 40B is not the best model for affordable housing, but if we're not building any, they're going to do that. And this is better than 40B. I mean, it's giving you quite a lot of choice in how to structure it and where to put it, but it still is a kind of a fairly clunky approach. And I think it's a good starting point, but not necessarily the ending point in terms of thinking
Mhm.
about how you would approach other areas once you check the box, I would say. I like the idea that you could create an overlay that works and then use that as a template elsewhere and then modify it as you think necessary. Slightly lower density, slightly lower height, different requirements, not by right, whatever it is. But
We could even talk about age restrictions and so forth, which has been seen as a negative to this whole process. So
age
it would,
restrictions,
it would,
mixed use.
it may help folks support one if we offer what they're looking for somewhere else. Maybe.
Yeah.
You could also, if you did it somewhere else, if you had some kind of mixed use approach, you wouldn't need to do the tortured thing we did about carving out all the commercial areas, which, are, if you think about it, they're actually kind of lost opportunities because those could be great places for a lot of nice housing, as long as you kept the ground floor. But under their framework, you can't do it. So we carved them out. But
Yeah, I think that we should either consider a zone around Greenwood, and maybe we go back to the relevant boards to have that conversation. But if we're starting to go down the path of coming up with new alternate districts with different foundational elements, I'd want to sit down and think about that a little bit more in terms of what does that timeline look like, and maybe we bifurcate, and maybe it's not on the same trajectory in terms of trying to get it past our Springtown meeting, just because then I think you start getting into, it gets a little further afield in terms of, are you going in and editing the mixed use overlay district? Does that trigger, to Greg, to your point in terms of mission creep? That's where I would start to become concerned if we started to get away from things that were foundationally different. So we should, I think it probably is a good point of consideration that we should go to our relevant boards and see if there's an appetite for taking the same approach around Greenwood Station, and then maybe you snap a line and call that it for now. Or if there's an appetite for a continued alternate evaluations of other things, then we can look at that. But I think that would be a good starting point, just for the sake of consistency and the ability to actually move this along in a meaningful manner and consistent with some of the timelines that we set forth, try to comply with the state. Otherwise, I think that if there's interest in having either this working group or a different working group evaluate all the other different options, then that's another thing. But I think that's a materially different type of effort, for lack of a better term. Does that seem like a reasonable way to phrase it to different folks?
Yep.
Okay. In that case, the last, so the two other things wanted to just check before we convened. The actual draft bylaw. So I think we've come up with a number of different directions to Aaron and Ezra. So the state has issued a draft kind of generic template bylaw for review and potential use by different communities, which Aaron distributed out to other folks. That is one method of pursuing this. The other way that we could potentially pursue this is we could take some of our existing bylaw, for example, the mixed use overlay was kind of the baseline in my mind, copy paste that, and then start editing it from there. I wanted to kind of get people's general feedback and potentially maybe some volunteers in terms of anyone wants to go bylaw hunting. But I don't know if other people have looked at the bylaws. We don't have to make any decisions. We're kind of running up on time anyway. Maybe this is a conversation we can have for next time. But I wanted to kind of throw that out there as something that we as a group should start thinking about, because if we're going to try to start coming up with a draft bylaw, we probably want to agree on what the starting point is going to be, and then start allocating how we're going to pursue that document.
So why wouldn't the starting point be how our current is formatted and just insert, what, like the recently made mixed use one, just taking that and then amending it as needed to use the state language that they require? Is that not plausible? Or
I think that's totally plausible. I think that's one of the ways that we had originally talked about moving forward. The only reason I'm bringing this up is because the state distributed out their kind of own baseline template, So I don't know if other people looked at it at all, but if that's something that people are interested in potentially utilizing, then we could pursue that. Or to your point, we can just copy what we already have since it's consistent with how the rest of our zoning is written. And then we could start flushing out the all the different MBTA specific aspects of that zoning overlay.
Jim, would a third, and it might not be at all, but just a question, a third option be whatever the bylaw review committee is? Because I think I heard, aren't they, maybe it's going to end up going a different direction, but wasn't there all of a sudden like wholesale changes to stuff?
Yeah, so I'll pause you there for a second, Greg. I think that we're way ahead of bylaw review committee.
Oh, way ahead. Okay.
Yeah, I think that we're bylaw review committee, talking to Chairperson Lieber, is probably spring 25.
Oh,
So I think that
Okay.
we're going to be passing something, and then they may or may not be editing what we pass anyway.
okay.
And-
So, yeah, okay.
And candidly, one of the thought processes in terms of the schedule I distributed out to people in terms of the post working group period for
Mhm.
this was to try to give something to the bylaw review committee, so we're minimizing the amount of rework they have
Yep.
to do once we actually pass this.
So I think my question was going to be, is there, because I thought I heard that they were, or at least recommending like wholesale format changes and stuff. Is there a template or any direction without talking about wording, but like how they want us to go? And maybe I'm wrong, but I thought I heard there was, it's going down a path that people didn't think it would go down or something.
So it's going down a path people didn't think it would go down, because I think the changes that they're envisioning in terms of underlying policy are more substantive than
Okay.
initially communicated. And you're right, they're going to potentially reformat the entirety of the bylaw.
I don't know, it may not affect what we're doing, but that was just something to throw out there.
Yeah, it may. At the same time, it's also, they just had their third meeting yesterday in terms of like overall section review. Their fourth is in September, and then they haven't even
Right.
defined what the process is past September. So
Okay, so do what we have to do and then they can deal with it from there.
unfortunately,
Yeah.
as much as I don't agree with that general policy,
Just add it to another chapter for them to fix.
yeah, unfortunately,
Yeah.
unfortunately, the communication between us and them was, why don't you guys wait until we're done and then start? And they said, well, we have to start now because of statutory timelines. And I was like, well,
Yeah.
sorry.
I can say, I mean, the states provided this sample, which certainly makes it easier for them to certify compliance, right? You take that, they can quickly see how you've edited it, and then they know that's it within the corners of this. Zoning, as you know, in a community tends to get pretty tangled up, and it can be very hard if you don't have this as a standalone piece. It's going to be very hard for people to, number one, figure out it's compliant, because they'll have to track through, this as defined in that section, but
Yeah.
there's a footnote here and all that. It's also going to mean when you change things, if you've created a kind of a wall around the overlay in the zoning, it's chapter 13A, special chapter, and nothing you change anywhere else affects it. It makes it easier to be sure you're keeping compliance, because when you then change something else and the AG says, wait, aren't you out of compliance? You can say, no. There's a wall around the overlay piece that only applies to that.
Yeah, while you're 100% correct, the level of changes that have been identified, as Greg mentioned, by the bylaw review committee, it's foundational in terms of how you even organize anything.
Yeah, well, that's again, it
Yeah.
might be that this is like if you include something and then they get to that foundational work, they may mess everything up. Whereas if you create this as a standalone states model and tell them fix everything else, but don't touch what's inside this box.
Yeah.
So that almost
You
leads me
haven't
to
met them.
that almost leads me to think then that we take the states,
I mean,
make it ours and call it 190 whatever it is, and it has everything in it, and then they can, if they like it.
And the only places
later,
and the only places it crosses over in some things like the dimensional table, you make sure includes all the districts, including the overlay.
Yeah.
The table of uses includes all. Normally I would say let's be skeptical of anything the state gave you, But here, I think they did give it, they gave it in a Word document with all kinds of places saying, you're going to want to look and figure out what is right here, was right there. I think and this is zoning that you're familiar with how it works. I mean, you'll see there's a section in there of, what do you want to have for setbacks? Do you want to require a site plan review? Is there an affordability piece? All that stuff in there. So Erin sent it around, and I think the other benefit is you could be doing this while everyone else is operating the same model, and sort of like Jim said, look and see how other people are changing it. So that'd be my recommendation. I think you could do it on your own based on your own overlay, but again, I'd keep it its own thing.
That's a good point. If something changes within the zoning, at least this is kind of like safeguarded as its own thing.
That's the hope. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I think at the end of the day, either one works for me, but it seems like there's two benefits from using theirs. It's theirs so they can quickly look at it and they're comfortable with it, and there's more of a possibility that they'll approve it. And it's easy to keep, walled off. Whereas I think the only benefit if we use our own is, okay, it's our own. But that's about it.
But you might want to do a careful walk through it
Yep.
and say, if there's anything in there that you don't like, you should feel free to change. I mean,
Yeah.
they're not giving you the script to read. They're giving you the.
Yep.
Oh, you're muted, Jim.
What I'd advocate is, I don't think that we have to beholden to make a decision right now. I want to flag this as something that between now and the next meeting, if people can, try to get a smarter on it. And then I'd love to just try to make a decision as it relates to how we're going to start writing some of the zoning, so we can try to start taking some of this direction and putting it into language such that we can start moving closer to something that we could, potentially vote on at a certain point. So, and then, I wanted
Jim,
to
just a clarification, you're saying move it to vote, but the vote is actually just to take it out of working group, present it to planning, and then present it to the public and that process, right? And we're not moving it to a warrant article, right?
No, that's correct. So that leads me right into the next thing I wanted to start to have a conversation about. So obviously, we've been talking about a lot of the work that we're doing right now as a group. We had always talked about potentially running through kind of on or about August 1st. Not a hard date, but just a target. We can kind of start moving things around. Started trying to think about if you work from spring town meeting backwards and try to come up with a way that we could engage with the relevant boards, engage with the public as best we can, start communicating it, to Julie's earlier point, start organizing and start thinking about how we actually get this approved. I went through this with Aaron and Theo Knoll from the planning board chair, kind of a potential way that we could potentially move through the post working group process and get to a town meeting. I don't know if other people have had a chance to take a look at this in terms of the thought process, but high level, the thought process is that we get through the balance of our work August sometime ish. September, August is probably not a lot of people super plugged into town politics, so the thought is kind of take August, A, give us a little bit in case our work slips, and B, give people the ability to get through the balance of summer. September, you're really starting to look at presenting to planning board, presenting to ZBA, town council, environmental sustainability committee, not in that order by any stretch, but give the ability to convene planning board, have them solicit feedback from the public, eventually have this group come back after that first kind of round of information provided by all the relevant boards, public and planning board. We kind of would potentially incorporate any of that feedback or talk about incorporating any of that feedback. You have town day. You've got eventually, you move through October. You're still kind of talking about what different things may or may not need to change. November town meeting. Probably some sort of engagement with the public at that period. It's unclear if we're allowed to present at town meeting because we're not, potentially voting on at that point. But maybe there's a booth or something like that. People walking in. Then kind of the thought process that through November, December, we make changes based on that first round of feedback we get from all the different folks. Kind of have a break for December for the holidays. January, we submit the revised bylaw to the bylaw review committee so we could get their feedback. So we're trying to minimize their amount of work. January, make edits. February, you go through all the different folks again, present, solicit feedback, and then any further tweaks we need to make kind of you have in February, March, and then into April, you go through planning board where you have to have the series of meetings with the public meeting in advance of warrant or sending it to town council, and then have it get on the meeting warrant. So I just put this together as like a general timeline. There's a lot of dates in here. They're not necessarily 100% like this has to be the date. We have a lot of coordination with other boards that they have their own agendas and things that are going on. But I wanted to kind of throw it out there as a general concept to different members of this team to see if anything seemed to be missing, anything seemed to be inappropriate in terms of the thought process, in terms of trying to build into opportunities for people to provide comment and then provide the ability to revise things. Is a not anything set in stone by any stretch, but just trying to throw this out there just to try to be smart about, so we don't get to the end and then figure out and then go, oh, what next?
So my only question, Jim, I think this all looks great, and I may have missed it, but is there, or do we even want to do? I saw that you put, present or something at town meeting. There is obviously planning board meetings. Something to think about if we want to do any other meetings that like less formal than planned, that are more listening sessions, or can we even do that? From open meeting law perspective, I guess if they're noticed and stuff, it doesn't matter. But outside of official meetings, just to get as reach out and as many touch points as possible. Just a thought. I don't know if we want to do that, if that's going beyond what we think we need to do or even want to do, because it wouldn't be an official feedback session, but yeah.
I think it's a really great point. I don't know the answer. And I do think that there's potentially opportunities for, if not necessarily like the working group presents to different groups. I think there's opportunities for either individual contributors on this group or, other folks to present. And I think that there's probably would want to be some sort of outreach campaign to members besides just all the relevant boards. I think we came up with a list of some potential folks to reach out to, being chambers of commerce, Rotary Club, PTOs. There's some pluses and minuses on it with all the different folks that we've been talking about. But Friends of Lake Quantapowhat being another good example. So I think that there probably wants to be an intentional, I'd call it, communication strategy at a certain point that may not be like formal, like we as a working group present to Friends of Lake Q, but maybe Greg goes and talks to Friends of Lake Q, for example.
I think that those informal are good, but you'd have to have a template presentation that's consistent through everyone in order to make sure that there's no one thinking that the message is being tailored and misleading to who they're talking to. But I think that as an overall outline, yeah, I don't know if we can offer too many meetings as long as they're always not one-on-ones, right? That they, they're not public, but like, the Rotary is in that kind of group setting. If they're the right group, I don't know enough about them, but you may want to add, library, offer one of those lectures and stuff.
Or even just start pointing people towards these, even if it might be too early now, but we're doing these videos for a reason, doing this, not in person for a reason. So it can be recorded and everyone can hear what we're saying. So, I mean, I don't think it's too early to at least let people know that, this is an open session.
Can you remind, this has to be a 2/3 vote too, right?
believe this has to be
Majority.
simple majority.
Simple majority.
The MBTA package talks about it being a simple majority, but it
Yeah.
kind of uses the word if that's your rules or something, so I didn't know what applied to us.
I believe it applies to us on the basis that when the law was passed changing the threshold, if it's a law that is allowing multi-use housing, that or makes it more easily doable, that becomes a simple majority in lieu of the 2/3 that is most typically applicable to zoning.
Yeah, that was my understanding too, Jim. That was what Governor Baker like fairly recently, if I remember right.
Yeah, I want to say it's within the last 5 years for sure, but probably within the last 3, I want to say. So, you know, more than happy to discuss this with anyone, or if anyone has any feedback, feel free to, send out something to, myself and Aaron. As I said, I'm guessing that between now and whenever we finish, this may or may not have to change, but if this is generally consistent with what people would expect, then, I'll proceed with reaching out to the relevant boards in terms of trying to get some of these things on the books as we get a little closer. And then, hopefully, we can finish up our work as it relates to the compliance zones. We can see if we can solicit some feedback from our relevant boards in terms of the other districts that are under consideration. And then based on that, hopefully we continue to kind of march along and then get something ready for consideration by the town for spring town meeting, like we all talked about.
Talking about kind of this community outreach, I just wanted to let this group know, Mass Housing Partnership is putting on a 2-day housing conference. The first day is June 14th, and it's a virtual Zoom meeting, and it's free. And their first session is Beyond the Usual Suspects, Eliminating Barriers to Participation for Community Engagement. So it might be worthwhile if you have the time to check it out. Kind of gives you an idea of other ways that we can be outreaching to the public, so we can have a more diverse group of folks coming. So I can send that information after this meeting. But I just thought that was perfect timing with what we were just discussing.
Absolutely. Thank you for the suggestion. I definitely encourage you to send that out. So moving on to item number 5, items not anticipated by the chair. I don't have anything to add to this. So I've opened up to anyone else who may have anything else they'd like to add before we move towards adjournment. Okay, seeing nothing, then moving to item number 6, adjournment. So do I hear a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, roll call vote. Aaron.
Yes, sorry.
No worries. Robin,
Yes.
Greg,
Yes.
and Julie.
Yes.
Okay, and yes for me, so 5-0. Thank you all for the time and really appreciate this conversation. Really illuminating.
Great
Yeah.
job keeping it right on time. That was perfect. Landed the
Thanks,
plane right
everybody.
in the
Nice work.
And then,
Bye, everyone.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone. Aaron,
Bye, guys.
before you hop off, can you just make sure we get this on the website?
Yeah. Yep.
Perfect.
I'll get. Well, I think. Yeah, I will when I get it. Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah. Just whenever you just connect with Jen and make sure that she's got everything she needs.
Okay. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you, guys.